this second step, we are going to create the header, board, and square components. So we are going to divide our app into other components, and we will use component compositions to create our app. Remember the single responsibility principle. We don't want one big component that does everything, that will be app. We want to structure our application. Each component will do just one thing, one responsibility, and we will use component composition to orchestrate everything. We have two types of components: container components and presentational components. App will be a container component, will have some logic, will have intelligence, and the rest of them will be just presentational components that receive props, data, and returns what should be rendered, React elements or HTML elements. This is our application, and remember that we have a header, a board, and then squares. Those are going to be the components that we are going to create now. Remember also the one-way data flow. The component, the upper component, the parent component, will render other components, and at the same time will render other components, and data will come from parent to children, and events will flow up. So children, if something happens, will call their parents, and that they will call their parents. In our case, to see it more specifically, we'll have, up to now we only have app, but now we will have app, a container component, and header and board, and 9 squares. App will render header and will pass as props the text that should be rendered, because it's not static. It does not always say the same. Sometimes it says player 1, player 2, or whatever. And the board will receive the values. Where does app get this information? From the state, of course. And the board that gets these values will render 9 squares and will pass each square its value. And what about events? When something happens in the buttons that are the square, they will call their parent, that is board, that at the same time will call app, that will change what it is needed in the state and will flow down the data. So events flow up, data flow down, one-way data binding. Okay, perfect. Let's code it in our application. We start from our interface that has the header and the board rendered into the screen. So the first step that we are going to do is to rename this component into JSX. And in this case, we have to restart, because it doesn't find it. We have to restart the development server just to get the new name, because we are going to use JSX components. Okay, so if everything continues working, we are going to start adding the components. Our first component will be header. So we create a header component, and we can take a look at another component or write it from scratch. As this is the first one, I am going to do it from scratch. I import React and I export the header class that extends React component. This is the default structure of a component. Sorry. Okay, this is the default structure. What does this component header returns? Well, it will return what we had in the beginning, that is header with the text as content. But now the text is not like this, because it comes as data from the parent as a prop. So this .props does .text. This is our header component. It renders, it's a presentational component that renders a header with a content that comes as data. Depending on the data that I pass to this component, it will render one thing or the other. this is just a presentational component, and it is usually defined as a function, but I keep it as classes because of simplicity. How do we use this component? Well, in the first place, we need to import it to be able to use it. So import header from header or header.jsx, and instead of this HTML tag that is lowercase, remember our components are uppercase, we want to add this header component with a prop, that is the text. We have used the same name, and this is the way to use the header component that we already defined, passing a new attribute, a prop, containing this variable. You can use other names, just not to confuse, or you can use the same name as I did. Let's check if it is working. We should see exactly the same. Well, it can resolve the header because of I have forgotten the root. Now I have the same. If I change the initial player, for example, from x to 0, it changes. So it's an intelligent header. It draws what it receives as a prop. Well, let's add the rest of the components, the board and the square. To create the board, the first thing that we do is to create a file. Board.jsx. I now copy the structure from the header and change the class name. How do we use this component? Well, we have in the first place to import it, and now we can use it. The board component will get this code because it's presentational code. It's something that is used inside the render, and now is the board, the one that will need to render the different values of the board. And now instead of this board, what I will render is a board component. But what does this board component need? Well, it needs the values as props, and I get them from the state. No, not props, but values. Now I have a header component and a board component, both of them imported here, and both of them has props that are from the state. Well, and in the board component, what I should do is, instead of using state, using the props, because board component doesn't have state. Only the top component app will have state. Now we have here props, and we have to render this component, this board. We have div and board. If we check, just to see if we have any kind of error, we get the same user interface. And now we are going to create the squares. For the square component, what we are going to do is, as always, in the first place, create the file. I can copy the structure of header into a square and change the class name. A square is just a button with some content that comes as props. It is also a presentational component. And in the board, to be able to use it, we only have to import square from square.jsx, and now here, instead of a span, we only have to render this square, but it doesn't have any child, but it is a value. So this is the component. If we check if everything is working, we now have these buttons, They don't do anything up to now, but they will in the future. Okay, this is everything for the square. We now have app, header, board. You can see now that this component is a container component, and header and board, and header, board, and square, sorry, are presentational components that receive as props what they should render and then what they should return to be rendered on the screen. Well, now if we start from this interface, we can do two final adjustments. The first one would be to add some styles. As we have seen, we can add a class name here, but in this example we are going to use JSX possibility to add it inside JavaScript. So if I use square style, this is a JavaScript object where I can indicate, in camel case, JavaScript properties, CSS properties, sorry. And how do I introduce it into the button? Well, with a style. Square style. And if I go to the interface, now it is 100 pixels height and width. And the final adjustment will be to remove this warning that React gives us. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key property. Well, this is for React internal way of optimizing the way to render with the virtual DOM and these kind of things, and what we have to do is to go to the board where we are doing the map and to add key attributes different for each iteration. How do we do that? Well, we have the key attribute and we add a string and plus row index plus column index. And here the same. Key equals a string row, for example, plus row index. If we save and go to the interface, there is no more that warning. We still have these small ones that are variables that we are not using, but for sure we will use them in the future. So now we have added a style inside JSX like this with a JavaScript object and a style property, and keys each time we are iterating an array here and here. They are not useful for us, but they will help React to optimize everything with the virtual DOM and the rendering method that React uses. Thank you very much.